I'll get this photocopy of, it's a 14th century German, statue. Can we guess who it is? Jesus is the guy standing upright, more upright. Who's the person leaning onto his chest? John the Divine, yeah, John. So first, before I'm going to read kind of the material in the novel that is the thread of the novel about this relationship. And I'm actually thinking a lot more about John the Divine now since this book came out. I'm now going regularly to church, which is new. And we always have 3 readings. I go to a Catholic church. And I'm really struck by the readings that pertain to John the Divine. So I'm doing a lot of thinking about that, and will be writing about that for myself. But before I begin, I just wanted to also thank Corey, who at David's request set this up, which was really, really nice. And David for interviewing me again, and Jeffrey and everyone at the library on this beautiful space, which is really nice. And for all of you who came, and for those of you who really helped bring other people to the work, because I'm not very good at social media, and so it's really nice that people are here, because Janet is good at it, and different people are. David is good at it and things like that. So I really appreciate that. So thanks for coming on a Saturday night. It's great. I always read something different, and so I've never read these portions, and I do that so that it'll be fresh for me, and the questions usually or comments afterward are ways that I learn about my work. So I like to always read a new thread so that I will learn new stuff. Also, David has been kind enough to do a Q&A with me. I think this is our second or third time. We know each other's work very intimately, and he texted me about an hour ago saying, like, what questions you want me to ask? And I sort of feel like anything is okay, and maybe you guys will ask, we feel very free to ask questions, because we don't have any program here, and it's very, very nice to have my ideal would be, I'll read a little bit, I'm gonna read for about 12 minutes, and then David will ask a few questions, and what I really, really love for myself, selfishly, is the interaction among ourselves. So I kind of wish we were a little bit, this is very lateral here, but I kind of wish we were a little bit more like a circle, because I would like conversation to happen among us as a group. And I've been really happy that the book has a little life in the world, and I get emails and things from people who have read the book. And now I wrote the book for myself, for my own issues, but then I realized it was a book, and then it got published, and I realized it's going to have a life in the world. And then I had sort of a dream what I want the book to do. And I feel really good that it's kind of doing my dream, which is to be kind of like a big table around which people of different persuasion, can gather. And here's a little. So it's like a safe place, where we can take these iconic stories and we can talk about them, whether it's from a position of hatred or liking it or devotion or atheism or what. And I have been getting really nice emails from people of very different persuasions. So it was part of a podcast with this guy in London. He asked for permission. Could he, read from the book, blah, blah, blah. He was paraphrasing it. I said, let me see the paraphrases. I like the paraphrases. We got permission from Counterpoint. And it wasn't a book, it wasn't a podcast just about This Is Why I Came. It was a podcast about Christian atheism, which is great. So he talked about the Death of God movement, which was a movement in professional theological circles 30 years ago. And I thought that was so great, And then I had this very beautiful letter that came from a woman who's Mormon, who is stepping away. I got a wonderful email from someone who is Jewish, but a humanist, not practicing, non-observant. So I feel like the book has it's a small book. It has a kind of a small life in the world, but it has the life I now very much want for it. So I would like that to happen tonight. If someone is a Buddhist or, very disinterested in religion or interested in such and such a thing, I really welcome that discourse across the divide of belief and disbelief. That's not even an authentic divide, I don't think. So in all the stories in this book, including God himself, there's wrestling with these characters about issues of belief and disbelief. So I don't even consider that a divide. I consider that kind of indigenous to this territory. So I hope that we can talk afterwards. I'm going to read quite briefly for that reason. And I noticed, I do look at Facebook to see what my friends are doing, partly, and there was a posting from a new friend. I don't really know him personally, but he's a friend, and he posted, it caught my attention because it was Mother's Day, and he posted, for all those for whom Mother's Day is difficult, he's a young gay man, for all those for whom Mother's Day is difficult. And I thought Mother's Day was difficult for me most of my life, and I dealt with that material in the memory room. For him, I imagined that it was his lifestyle and his sexual orientation that made Mother's Day difficult. That's just what I'm assuming. It's certainly widespread. So I wanted to read here today about, because we have seen scripture used, unfortunately and erroneously in my mind, to say certain kinds of lifestyle are okay and certain kinds aren't. Certain kinds of body or sexual orientation is okay, certain kinds aren't. And it's horrible. And what we can really find in the New Testament, which is what Christians call the part that they added to the Hebrew scriptures, they call that the New Testament, we can find very beautiful, very particular evidence of the relationship between Jesus and one of the apostles. And this apostle calls himself the one whom Jesus loved. Mary Magdalene isn't called that. Nobody has that title in the New Testament except this one apostle. John is his name, and he was the young one. And he was these are some of the things about his life. He was a historical person. So he and his brother Simon were both called, and Peter, the first three apostles that Jesus called to follow him. They were disciples of John the Baptist before that. James, and John were brothers, if I misspoke. Peter, James, and John, those three were at almost all the key events. They were at the raising when Jesus, first of all, let me say about my method. I'm not going to talk about did these things really happen. I'm not going to talk about did Jesus really raise from the dead. I don't care. I'm just going to accept the stories the way they are, and then we're going to go into them, all right? I have a degree in theology. I know the academic debates. I'm not interested. I'm interested in stories, okay? So we're accepting these stories tonight as they are. Okay, so Peter, James, and John are three that are mentioned at all these key events. For example, when Jesus goes up onto a mountaintop, and they have this vision of him with Elijah and Moses, which would be, the law and the prophets, representing the Jewish Hebrew scriptures. And Peter wants to build tents for them and all that stuff. And then they disappear, okay? And that's like a private event. They are there at the raising of the daughter of this guy Jairus. So Peter, James, and John are at the raising of this young girl. Not all 12, but these three. John is the only male that we have record of that was at the cross, when Jesus was crucified. The women were there. Peter wasn't there, no. But John was there. And from the cross, Jesus gives his mother, Mary, who was there, dying, to John. This is your mother, this is your son. That's really intimate. Okay, so then John, we have 5 books in the New Testament written by this John character. One is a Gospel of John, and then one is the book that's at the last book in the Bible. Does anybody know what that book is? And it's a very strange book. It's called the Apocalypse, the Revelation. And it's filled with all this violence. So I'm just getting into why I'm reading this. Okay, so if you just read, has anyone read that book? That book of the Bible? It's filled with really violent images, right? Like insects that are the size of, horses and candlesticks and flaming and a lake of fire and all this stuff. So we get the word apocalyptic from that, right? So it's supposedly written by John, who was, we know historically, exiled by the emperor to the island of Patmos, right? And then his exile was revoked, and he can come back to the mainland. But that was a common way to deal with problem people. So he was in solitude. And so I thought, and he says at the beginning of that book that he wrote it, that this vision came to him when he was on the island of Patmos. All right, so I first started looking at him because I was reading the book of the Apocalypse, just out of curiosity. I thought, what kind of things would happen to this person, any person, that they would write something like this, right? So the method is kind of like you take the story as a given, and then you take people in the Bible like they're like us, and then you go like, what would it take for me to write something like that? And then you kind of, this is what I did, and then I just make up that happened to John. Yeah. So I'm going to read the little fragment about John on the island of Patmos, too. And the last kind of intro is this, that I look forward to the day when people who are in love with someone of the same gender do not have to defend that, right? So I see in the events and the discourse between Jesus and John, who became known as John the Divine, a very particular relationship. And I assume that Jesus was fully human and that he experienced everything we experience, including falling in love. I imagine he fell in love many times. And so people get titillated by thinking about, Jesus and Mary Magdalene or something. That has never really interested me as a romantic thing. I'm just not that interested in that, but I'm very, very interested in the fact that of all the apostles, John is the one who is reclining, because they ate lying down in those days, reclining against Jesus at the Last Supper when the Eucharist was instituted. And this is just to show how common this iconography is. You can just get this on search Google Images for John the Divine. This is a medieval German statue. This is Jesus with John the Divine. This is not radical, and this is like 700 years ago. And it's a tender. This is a tender, beautiful image, and I love it. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit. I wish I wrote more about John the Divine. I'm thinking more about him now. And then I'm also reading a little fragment about God himself, because really central to this book, I realized once it was done, and people pointed stuff out to me, was that everybody is imperfect, everybody hungers, including God himself. And I use masculine language for God as a pronoun. I don't want to get into that discussion either. That's just, I'm used to it, okay? I don't think God is a gender. I don't even, I don't want to get into that. But I'll say he when I'm referring to God sometimes. So excuse that convention. Language is hard when you're talking about something that is ineffable. So, but I think that God had, if you read the Bible, God changes his mind and repents a lot. And I came to think that the God of the scriptures really had one, if we just read the Bible like it's a book, beginning to end, nobody reads it that way. But for this purpose, it's interesting. If we just read from the beginning through creation, through Revelation, we find that God is often doing things and then changing his mind. The most dramatic example is, like the flood. And then he says he's sorry afterwards and stuff. And I know I didn't mean to be flip, but that's true. He repents of it. Okay, so that's so I came to see, not me, but my character Bernadette came to see God as having also a hunger, like John the Divine had hunger, like Jesus had hunger, and his hunger was to be known, and to be known not for his power, but for his mercy. And to me, that makes sense of some of these Bible passages. So I'm going to read a little bit here. John the Beloved. Your end is coming, John, the beardless one said. It was painful for Jesus holding all of John's sweetness one last time. I'm going to prepare a place for you, John, Jesus said, seeing that John would be the only apostle to live into old age, the only one not to be killed for his sake. Jesus then whispered, time will be tender toward you. But John wept and wanted none of this. Hold me, he demanded, and could not be consoled. The Last Supper. It's time, Jesus said, feeling that his arrest was near. Going to a rented room where no one felt at home. Splinters in the skin, makeshift arrangements. He needed discomfort as he began to loosen himself, loosen his body, to break himself as if into pieces, to be fed to strangers and dogs. his body that didn't want to turn from the world, custard on the tongue, the love of his family and followers like fragrant leaves. He said, "This meal will be our last." Taking some bread, he said, "This is what will happen to my body." And he tore it into pieces. "When you eat it," he pleaded, "remember me." When the soldier thrust his sword into Jesus' side and water and blood flowed down, Mary reached to bind the body whole again. But the soldier blocked her, and she fell in a swoon, not because she was unprepared for grief, but because she had seen it coming for over 30 years and had found no way to stop it. John held her, and as she fell, she thought, looking at the soldier, "You made this wound for me, so that I can put all of my suffering into the cave of his body, still alive, still warm. O wound, O holy door." Jesus cried out to his Father, "Why have you forsaken me?" And God said to the underworld, "Take him. He's yours." Hearing this, Jesus breathed his last. God hid behind the sun, saying, "It is true then. I am not merciful." As they buried Jesus in the tomb, God imagined an earlier world with just the land and sea and heavens and plants, the creatures that had no heart at all. He wondered if he should return things to that state, abandon his project entirely, that long hope. But he still wanted what he'd always most wanted, which was to be loved not for his power or his omniscience, but for his mercy. And for that he needed man. The ferns could never know his mercy or be grateful for it. The ferns could never love him or turn away from him as they could turn away and toward the sun. Then he thought, perhaps a revision is in order, and told himself, I should learn to do this for myself, to not need man. Wouldn't that be almost as good? A paler pleasure, but not nothing. As the soldiers arrived to guard the tomb in which Jesus lay, God opened the drawer of the past and then lifted the veil of the future so that he could see in one glance all of time, from its beginning to its end, and from what existed before time to what existed after it. And he held all time and all that it contained on his lap and touched it and turned it over the way a grandparent holds a grandchild, and so holds also the parents of the child, past and future, in an inspecting reverence. God held all of time together, and seeing that he was alone and would cause harm to no one, he let himself feel all the anger he saw in time, all of his fury, his disappointment at the floundering of man, at the cruelty and arrogance and pride and greed of man. God held all of it in his hands. And then, from deep within himself, forgave all of it, both in advance and in retrospect, so that his anger and mercy together poured out like an envelope cut open. And the earth quaked, and some of the dead rose from their tombs, and the veil of the temple was torn in two. And when his mercy had consumed all of his anger, God cried out, "It is finished." When he opened his eyes, God saw a procession without end. Eve at the front, the mother of mankind. All of the prophets and holy men and women and children of all times and places, and people he did not know or could not remember. "Rescue us," he heard them say. "We have been waiting for you." And God saw Noah, and then all those he'd slain, that each was waiting for him, that each had forgiven him. And because he had fashioned them in his own image, he saw that then he too must be merciful after all. As he watched the long pageant, God saw not only the fact of his mercy, but the extent of it. That not one was left in hell, not one refused to forgive him, even Judas, not one. And God wept at the beauty of their mercy, which was also his great mercy, that it was infinite. John on Patmos. Exiled, no one to talk to, no one to listen, his hair in knots infested with lice, John cast out his net of words, hoping to catch himself like a fish. Touching the trunk of a palm, its segmented layers like playing cards, but rough against his hands, he whispered, "Wasn't I the one he loved? Wasn't I the one who rested on his breast?" The trunk mute, the fronds silent above. He poked the sea anemone with a stick. "You there, speak up. That last night with the tearing of the bread, didn't he say he loved me?" The anemone closed in, withdrawing its soft, mushy green. Each night he recited a litany to the fire. I, John, was there when he raised Jairus' daughter from the dead. I was there on the holy mountain when he became like light. Peter and James were with me. They are my witnesses. They would say it happened, and I was the one he loved. When the driftwood turned from red to white, he told himself, this is corroboration. He did not take shelter from the sun. His eyebrows whitened. His lashes grew thick and interwoven. His skin gathered to itself a calcium casing of sea salts. Sand crabs made their home on the top sides of his feet. His hair grew long. He wrapped it around his waist like a belt. After 100 days, he no longer remembered the house of Jairus or Moses and Elijah on the holy mountain, how they stood in the flagrant light. Instead, he heard tambourines and the small sound of finger drums and the night trumpets. He saw stars falling like candlesticks. He dreamt of locusts shaped like horses, wearing crowns of gold, their tails like scorpions with deadly sting. He heard strange words, Gog and Magog, in his sleep. Waking, he thought, now it is happening. I am going mad. He called the sand whoremonger, the sea anemone sorcerer. He cursed them all into a lake of fire. He no longer wanted someone to say it happened, John. Jairus, the holy mountain, leaning on his breast. It's your history. It all belongs to you. No. Instead, he told himself, I am a sea urchin with purple spines. I have no memory, no feelings, no thought at all. Still the visions came. The earth scorched by fire, sea black as sackcloth, the moon blood. He cursed memory, called it mother of harlots, Babylon. He sat as still as stone, told himself, I am no longer a sea urchin with purple spines. I am not here at all. A silver fish landed on the shore, large, like none he'd seen before. He smelled it and thought, the pelican must have left this for me, even though he had never seen the pelican. He did not eat the fish. He refused to believe in miracles. He felt a pecking on his cheek. With his fingers, he pulled apart his lids. Salt crumbled in his fingertips. On his shoulder, a black crow sat with its narrow yellow beak. He knew it was not an island bird. He heard voices. Soldiers lifted him to their boat. They said, we have a new emperor. Your exile is revoked. In the rocking of the boat, he heard the voice of the one he once loved, saying, John, I come quickly. In the sky, he saw a woman clothed with the sun. He saw the distant coastline, white roofs of houses, and thought, they are taking me to the holy city. I see its foundation laid in jasper and chalcedony. He called to the soldiers, look, we are going to paradise. John's words crossed the Aegean. New Christians found themselves caught in his net. So many silver fish, they canonized him. They didn't call him John the Raving or John the Lunatic. They called him John the theologian, John the divine. They gathered his nightmares into a book and called it Revelation. Thank you.
So Mary, thank you. I'm always very affected by your reading, and I could hear you read all day. And this in some ways is a tough crowd. You know, we're in West Hollywood where everyone's gay or Jewish, and often sort of, or might as well be. And I mean, that's a ridiculous statement, but in some degrees, I mean, it's a crowd perhaps that's not very intimate with the Bible or biblical stories, and is somewhat Jesusophobic, if that's a word. So when people, and I don't know whether this happened to you, when people respond from either a very staunchly atheistic standpoint or people who are, for whom the Bible is the Word of God for the people of God and not to be futzed with, how do you respond to that, and how are you finding that this book still, I mean, I'm still very affected by what you read, even though I don't necessarily have the same relationship with the subject matter as you do.
Yeah. Well, the only person that has responded to me personally that was negative, well, no, there was another person, but the only friend who was offended was a conservative Catholic, and I don't know if she really read the book, but she said, how could you write that Mary and Joseph divorced? And I didn't write that they divorced, I just wrote the way it is in the New Testament, which is, Joseph stopped showing up after Jesus is 12. So I imagine that they had really a lot to deal with, right? I mean, none of this had ever happened before, and he didn't know if his wife was nuts or not. I mean, if you just read the gospel like they're ordinary people, they had their challenges, so it made sense to me that he drops out of the narration. He's not at any of the miracles. He's not at the resurrection. He's nowhere quoted in the New Testament. He's not given any patronages, which people who are deemed sort of holy, like even now we canonize people, they're given patronages. You're the patron saint of blah, blah, blah. He wasn't given patronages for over 1,000 years. So, I mean, this raises questions, So, but anyway, she was very offended, and she doesn't even want to see me anymore, so that was a loss. But I felt good that she at least told me that she was offended, and I'm hoping that the discourse will continue at a very slow pace. I hope that, I reached out to her and didn't get a response, but I mean, time is long, so I don't know. So this guy in London, I was really thrilled that he liked the work very much, and I didn't know there really was Christian atheists. I mean, that's a hybrid that I wasn't aware of. I mean, you were aware. I'm not aware of most things, but I mean, I wasn't aware of that. So that was kind of exciting. I thought I was very excited about that.
How does Christian atheism work?
Well, I'm not the one it's a new in my vocabulary, but I think my guess is that I think a lot of people become atheists because that it doesn't even, first of all, a sense that you don't need a notion of the supernatural to try to be a good person. I mean, this is obvious, you don't. We all know that. That's true. You don't need a notion of you don't need a supernatural structure to find the world orderly and with interesting chaos here and there. I mean, you don't need that. So the two kind of, blades on the scissors, I think, for atheism, from my understanding of it, is that first of all, that the institutional religions have done horrible things and are doing horrible things now. We all know this. Religious language is used for hateful crimes and divisiveness between people and all that. So the crimes of institutional religions are everywhere abounding. So there's that reason, and then the other reason is just there's no proof, and we don't need. So I see someone like Sam Harris is very interesting because his. He's difficult to read because he's caricatures, so much. But what you feel in the work is his desire to teach his children, for example, to be moral.
For those of us for those who don't know Sam Harris's work.
New atheist guy, very popular, like Hitchens and people like that. Yeah. So I mean, like I put in my acknowledgments, I mean, I'm sort of grateful to people who refuse to worship or acknowledge a God that is ridiculous. I mean, this is part of Christian theology. It's probably part of Hebrew theology too. I've never studied that, but I mean, it's not religious to worship an idiot. It's not religious. It's not really religious to worship anything that produces hatred. It's not religious. So at me as a now practicing Catholic, I mean, I'm saying that publicly, I'm coming out of the closet, but you know, I just don't view that as religious. I don't view the junk that's going on in our public political discourse now, if we want to call it discourse, as religious, even though the Bible is invoked and all this, you know. So part of the reason I wanted to read about John the Divine, I mean, if you look at the New Testament and the great tenderness and the privilege that Jesus gives to John, who becomes known as John the Divine over and over again, and the fact that he refers to himself as the one whom Jesus loved, that's nowhere else in the New Testament. We have certainly, if you want to go up against text for text, against people who are, you know, against, say, homosexual love.
Don't point to me.
Well,
you can.
Well, you're the questioner, you know. You know, I mean, you can quote Bible back to them. You can say, well, what about John? You know, I mean, it's just horrible. It's horrible. So my interest is, I mean, I think we're all kind of in the same boat, right? We're trying to figure out what life means and what is the largest framework in which we can understand life and being here, and you know, like that. So I don't, anyone who does not come from that place and who sort of poses, whether it's, you know, like the arrogance and the intellectual pride in a lot of the new atheism is just disgusting. I mean, so anyone who comes from kind of intellectual arrogance or knowing all the answers and stuff is someone who's not interesting to me. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's religious, and I don't think it's moral, and I don't think it's smart, and I don't think it produces good fruit, you know? Mm-hmm. You know.
When you come out as a practicing Catholic, which is,
yeah, I just did that just now.
Which is a brave thing. I don't know whether it's your first time.
I think it is.
A lot of us here are probably thinking, you know, how do you personally reconcile being that in the context of, you know, what are perceived as the horrors of the Catholic faith?
Well, I fell in love with the Catholic Church when I was in grad school at Harvard, and that was over 30 years ago. And I'd never been into actually a Catholic church, which is fine. I mean, I was studying the first 4 centuries of after Jesus died, the first up to 325, when all the intellectual rigor of ironing out what we know as the creeds, which Christians say every Sunday, it was tremendously intellectually rigorous and very interesting to me. So I became a Catholic at that time, and I think this is resurfacing for me. I'm sort of like falling in love again with a very long, you know. I mean, I'm reading like St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas and the greatest minds of Western civilization. And so I don't really make those decisions on who is the person who is representing the, you know, the church. It's a vastly imperfect institution. It's one of the oldest institutions on the planet, and nonstop, and it is aware of its grievous sins, we could say, to use a religious word, but the vision is the most beautiful and most complex that I have encountered. And by complex, I mean that, and I'm reading this very interesting book now with the guy who got the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. I forget his name. I'm so bad at names, but never mind, I'm not going to talk about it, but it pertains to this. But you know, the notion that the paradox is really important. And so for me, the Catholic Christian tradition is my favorite, partly because it holds intellectually the most paradoxes as paradoxical, not resolving it one way or the other, but holding two things like, you know, like sound is both a wave and a particle, right? That's paradoxical. Well, they're both true. Are we going to say, you know, I'm just a waveist, I'm just a particleist? No, we can't do that. So when we encounter something that is paradoxical to our understanding, the most intellectually respectable thing is to retain the paradox. And I find I was raised as an evangelical with an atheist father, but evangelical mom. And so I found in science the ability to retain paradox, you know, as my dad was a physicist. In the evangelical tradition, I found certain paradoxes that were religious dissolved on one side at the expense of the other side. And so I find that intellectually the most rigorous and the most honest is the Catholic tradition. But, and the church has done a lot of good things too. I mean, those are just obvious, but I don't, you know, probably people know those. But
Mary, you talked in that response about the studying the intellectual rigor of faith.
Right. Right.
And in this is where I came, you let go of that in a sense, and you explore the stories from a fictionalized, adventurous kind of mind. Can you talk a little bit about that as a paradox?
Yeah, that was a big shift. So some of us, there are a lot of writers in the room, and a bunch of us started, or at one time earlier in our career, we were working with a certain writing teacher, Kate Braverman, and that's where I started. And so I had my PhD in theology, and then I was raising a family and stuff, and then it's a long story how I got into writing, but one thing I had to learn in writing fiction was to unlearn the intellectual habits of the academic, you know, of theology. So I didn't need to prove anything and have footnotes or anything. I just had to write in a way that was persuasive. So I could have, you know, if I were Kafka, you know, you're Kafka, you can have a guy wake up, he's an insect, right? You just have to write it well. So it was a really, you know, a letting go of a lot of habits on the page, and it took a while, and I'm probably still doing it, you know. So what I like about this book and what I love about fiction, I realize I think about theological things, but not like a theologian. You know, but I do think about, to me, theology is still the largest discipline. It's larger than science by far. Science is very modest in its agenda, and I have a deep love for science, but to me, theology is still the queen of the sciences, to use a medieval term. So I do think about theology a lot, even when I was, you know, for 30 years not going to any church or something. So I have the natural inclination to think in those terms, but I don't like to operate as a theologian. I'm not trying to persuade another person. I'm trying to ask questions and think about them in a fictive way. Because in fiction, as we know, those of us who are writing here, you know, writing poetry or fiction or something, we have no peer review of the content. We have peer review if we did it well or not, but we will go anywhere, right? Now, if you're a chemist, you don't have that. And if you're a physicist, you don't have that. And you don't have it if you're a evangelical preacher who went to, you know, Dallas Theological Seminary and you're in the pulpit. No, you can't say anything you want. You know, but as for fiction, we can say, oh, right, we could write the most fantastic, well, people in this room are writing amazing things. I know their work right now in process. It's amazing. And there's no limit. So it's kind of like, what I like about fiction is what I like intellectually about theology. That it's nothing, that theology includes all that is, and all that might be, and all that maybe used to be, and all that maybe will be. You know, there is no limit to where theology can go as a discipline. So it is my favorite discipline, you know. But how to do it, I like fiction, because similarly, there is no limit. There's a limit of your talent. There's a limit of, you know, what is the market? Who cares, you know, about the market? I'm not swearing. I'm really good on these. I'm not swearing. I'm very proud of myself. I like swearing. But you know, there's no limit to fiction. And there's no limit to writing symphonies or you know, or visual arts. There's no limit in the arts. There's no intrinsic limit. There are the limits of your practice.
Can you talk about the connection for you between the visual arts and your writing of things you just mentioned there?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure that out.
You better figure it out quickly.
I figured out a couple things. You know, like that. This is embarrassing, but I was told a long time ago, don't ever admit this, but it's true. I don't really read very much. I don't. I read, but I don't read books or screen very much. And what I read is really the visual world mostly. Like the ceiling, for example, which is replicated down on the ceiling below, but it's done in a different medium. It's amazing. That's why I don't do book reviews and stuff, because I don't know a lot of books, and I don't know how to put a book in a context with other books. But this is the cool thing. I think it's okay to just be how we are, right? Like we just have to figure, like it's okay. Like if you mostly get your writing, or say you're a therapist and you mostly get the thing that really helps you get centered and helps you be present with that quality of presence, which is the reason people go to therapists instead of just their friends. If that is cooking, then cooking is what you need to do. You don't need to take more, psychology classes. So I really do think that what we take in as food is not necessarily what we put out. For example, Motherwell, who I've talked a lot about in these readings, but I mean, he's a current, again, true love. But I mean, he studied philosophy at Stanford. He got very late into the visual arts and stuff like that. So, and he read literature, he was very influenced by literature, more than I am. And he's a visual artist, right? So I do think that it's okay. I mean, it's got to be okay. I can't do it be any different. I still am very uncomfortable in bookstores, for example, for a lot of reasons about stuff that happened to me when I was trying to read. It's a whole other story, but I just gave up therapy. I mean, there's certain things you can't fix, so I still have that wound. I mean, you're in therapy like 3 days a week for 8 years. You just have to say, look, I like Red again. I can listen to Brahms. I'm still nervous in bookstores. I'm done, I mean, you can't fix all your wounds if you have a lot of wounds. If you have a lot of trauma, you can't fix all your wounds. You just have to get to a point where you have the tools to do most of them and, like that. But anyway, so I'm still very uncomfortable in bookstores. But I'm like SF MoMA just opened up, last week. I mean, I was in heaven when I saw, from above, this is, the SF MoMA got this Fisher collection, then they built this building. We've been having the No Museum for 3.5 years. It just opened. And when you go in, this is just so amazingly gorgeous. You know who Sarah is, who does these huge metal things, right? Sarah? Okay, so the way it is, you go up from the ground level if you come in on third. And then you have this view of Sarah, like the ellipses that are kind of like they're as high as this white thing, and they're kind of leaning out, and there are like 4 of them going like that. But you never get to see it from above. But the way with this new this new part, you come up the stairs and you see Sarah down there because it's beautiful sort of stadium seating. It's not even seating, it's just beautiful wood going down. And then there's Sarah down there. I mean, my body was shaking. I just felt like heaven exists, I'm here. Heaven exists, So, but some people feel that way when they read Joyce, right? Mm-hmm. So it's okay. I mean, I don't think I can be a visual artist. I never think of making visual art, but I've written about a visual artist, but so my relationship, I'm trying to figure it out because I don't get it, but that is what happens, and music too, or design, or something like that, or fashion. I mean, whatever feeds us, right?
Well, for a non-reading closet Catholic.
I know, I'm letting out all the cats out of the bed. Stop the video, Christian.
You've written something that, for me, as a reader for whom the Bible stories in the Bible don't resonate in the way they resonate for you. When I read the stories, and this is why I came, there is a vibration and an energy around them that is really very compelling. And I encourage you all to, after we're done, go over to the Book Soup folks who we're delighted to hear, and give yourself an opportunity to read these stories of Mary's. We could go on forever, but I know Mary wants to include the folks here. So if any of you can think of any questions, Janet's up already.
Or comments.
And just before I saw that, I'd just like to say, I know Mary you mentioned, there's a group of writers here who have come to all of Mary's readings, and we support each other, and it's really a beautiful, wonderful thing for which I'm very grateful, and I know Mary is too. So you know who you are, folks, and we're glad you keep showing up.
And we have to show up in the fall. We have to get to the library. Where's Corey? We have to schedule David for Wedding Bush Road. Book Soup will come and do you probably read a Book Soup. Book Soup will read the book. And any of us can Q&A him. I'll be in the audience or I'll be up here. But it's a really beautiful, beautiful book. It's just, I don't know the final ending because I didn't see that draft. So I don't know actually the ending. But it's a really, really beautiful book. You'll love it.
That said, Jack.
I have a question that you are absolutely I can't imagine a better person than you, a novelist, dealing with this material to ask is the nature of the word. You know, isn't that the beginning of the Bible?
It is.
You know, isn't the
And it's also the
beginning-
title for Jesus, also, is the Word. John, this one that loved him so much, called him the Word.
Oh, well, let's talk about like the word and the I always puzzle it. I mean, I'm somebody with like no religious education whatsoever, so I'm looking at in the beginning was the word.
Yeah.
The word.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that as a novelist.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
You know,
I care very much about language. For me, reading a book is the problem. So
what does that mean
what does the
in the beginning?
yeah the word a beautiful thing about the biblical
It's the first, it's the opening.
And the word
Yeah.
was made flesh,
And
meaning the word is spoken into being.
right. That's so in John. Okay, we'll just back up a little bit. Okay, so you got Genesis is the first book in the what Christians call the Old Testament, what Jewish people call the Hebrew Scriptures, right? And the beginning of that is the story of creation, and creation is by speech only until Eve is made, but only speech. So God says, "Let there be light," and there's light. You know, in the beginning was the Word, and so in Christianity and in Judaism, I've never studied Judaism, you know, but it's in the Jewish scriptures and in Christianity, the word is sacred, and things like that. And then we have in the New Testament 4 Gospels. They're at the beginning of the New Testament. 3 of them are called Synoptic Gospels, and then the 4th one is John's Gospel, the person we're talking about. And the other Gospels, they share most of the material, but they're all a little bit different. And they talk about Jesus in the manger. You know these stories, right? John doesn't do anything like that. He says, what, as you were just saying, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. And he puts the existence of Jesus from before all time, from forever, and is called the Word, capital W. So it is also, it's resonating with Genesis account, and it's combating a certain heresy that was going around in 90 AD when this was written. And it's doing a lot of things, but language is vivifying. It is the thing that brings things to life and brings things into existence. And so in that way, it's very much, we could say, connected to those of us who are involved in creating objects of meaning using language. And I do care very much about language. It's so powerful, right? It's so powerful.
But isn't it true also that language creates meaning in a way that a visual object doesn't necessarily?
I think they're different. I mean, I don't think, what I like about writing is that you have a lot more control of the meaning that the person, like everybody, let's say you all read 2 pages of my book, and everyone would have a different meaning to it, but that range of meaning is really narrow compared to what we would all think if we looked at Motherwell's 157th Elegy to the Spanish Republic at LACMA or wherever it is now. I mean, so the range of what meaning means in language art is much more narrow, and I think that's why I write, because you have a lot more control, right? Yeah.
So I'm interested because you talked about that in fiction you can go anywhere, you can invent anything.
Yeah.
In this piece, you have kind of taped yourself down to an existing narrative, which I recognize having had a Protestant youth. So can you talk about the decision, the writerly decision to do that, to take an existing work,
Yeah.
and then to vivify it in a way that for me makes it more sacred because it brings it to life as if for the first time. That's my experience in hearing you read it. But can you talk about the authorial kind of decision that you made that I'm going to tell this story fresh?
It started by default, and people who have heard me talk about this, I'm sorry to repeat, but I was working on a novel from 2000. My first novel came out in 2002, but it was sold in 2000. I was then immediately working on another novel, and I worked on it till about 2012, and it was failing. And I work almost full time. It was pretty devastating the last couple of years. I was really feeling like I was on thin ice, sanity-wise. And so I would think a draft was really good. It gave me what I needed. It took me to where I needed to go. I felt like I've done it. And then I would send to the readers that I really trust, and it was not working. It was really hard. So this, and David was one of those readers, and Garth Greenwell, who I want to put in a plug for before the night's out, he was another one. Garth Greenwell, What Belongs to You, came out with FSG. It's just gotten rave reviews in every conceivable place, and it's beautiful, and he's a wonderful person. You should buy the book. Okay, What Belongs to You, Garth Greenwell. But anyway, so Garth said, so I had this draft I sent to him, and about a month later I got it back. It was the same thing, weak praise. But he said, but those 14 pages you wrote about Zacchaeus are really interesting. I could see, a little Bible book. He said things about the novel like, this is good, this is good. That's not what you want. When they start doing that, like, oh, well, this is kind of good. It's like crap. You want them to go like, oh my God, the whole thing just lifts off. But when it's not like, yeah, this is kind of good, I kind of like that. It's like, okay. But he said these 14 pages are really, really good. I thought I could sort of see a little Bible book with you doing these monologues, and it's in this book, the Zacchaeus one, and it's 14 pages. It's the longest fragment, I think. And I just imagine what happened with Zacchaeus. The story, 'cause you were Protestant. After he has this one afternoon encounter with Jesus, and we never hear from him again. It's not like John the Divine. We never hear from him again. So I just imagine like he probably fell in love with Jesus, then what would it be like? And Jesus will be dead, and then he'd live like 50 more years, and I put him back up in the tree for the rest of his life. Anyway, but so when I first heard that news from Garth, I was really devastated. I just thought, fuck me. I was just so devastated. And then I remembered that I really liked doing that fragment because I just made it up, right? And it wasn't about my life, which my novel was, because I always kind of write from my life, right? But it wasn't about my life. It was about Zacchaeus, a Bible character who lived in the sycamore tree. And I felt really free. And I never really imagined stuff before. Like the memory room has almost nothing imagined in it, except that the character plays the cello. I'm not good at imagining. But when I went to the Bible material, I could imagine things, I think, because I love these stories from a child, and there are lots of reasons why I identified with all these stories, and they saved my life, one of the factors. But anyway, so I pouted for like 2 days, I thought, and then I just remembered that delight. And then I just went out, I was at my boyfriend's house, I went out to the table outside in this terrace, and I just wrote the Adam fragment. It is the first fragment in the book. It was the first fragment I wrote after Zacchaeus, but that's just a coincidence. I wrote about Adam because I thought, imagine him being like me, but I didn't even realize I was doing it like me. But it was like Adam, like he's because the story in the Bible, he's looking for a companion. Like he's looking at the pelican, he's looking at the tiger. He doesn't have a companion because he doesn't have a human, right? So he has this. He names all the animals and everything. But he's missing something, right? So because he's missing someone who is like himself. So then Eve is created. But so I kind of identified with like making, like all these animals. He's naming thousands of animals, and it's like, when's the good stuff going to come around? They're all parading by him, and he's like, you're the pelican, okay? You're the headbutt, and he's just like, oh my God, that's kind of how I felt. So I changed it a little bit that he thought he created all the animals. I have fun with it. But so that I put all of my frustration, and he tries to commit suicide. He fails at that too, and that's kind of how I felt then. Like and then I liked it, and I had this little turn at the end of that Adam story that I liked. That he realizes maybe he didn't make all the animals, and maybe someone knows him, who brought Eve to him, who knows his hunger better than he knows it himself, and he named that other who he could not see, God. And so it was the beginning of something else that happens in the book, which is the creation of theological language. So then I just was on a roll, and it just came out like in, 2 months, and I was just like, I just did it mostly from memory,
That's amazing also in that it took those 10 years to get to that.
Yeah.
And so those 10 years weren't wasted, because without that there wouldn't be this.
Yeah, I like to say that. Or like Janet says, the novel that you have to throw away. It's like, dang, it doesn't take. But yeah. Let's just say it did take that long. It did take. Well, we know that, right? No matter what our work is, we could be working in an ER room or be an architect, or things take what they take. We're parenting. Things take what they take, right? Your kid's messed up, and it's like 3 years, his kid's messed up. What are you going to do? You do what you can do. The rest, it happens when it happens.
Mary, I remember you used to schlep downtown from Santa Monica to my office, and we'd sit in a conference room
Right.
on the 41st floor and read our stuff to each other.
Yes.
And it was true then that those biblical stories were the ones that jumped off the page. At that time, the novel had another title. Can you tell us Can you tell us about this title?
Oh,
And
good.
that
I
one?
thought you were gonna. I don't remember what the other title was. Oh yeah, for this title.
It was The Porch of Heaven.
Oh yeah, I
Remember?
like that title.
Me
Nobody
too.
can use that title. I really love that title. The Porch of Heaven as a name for a lover. I mean, I very much believe in that. You know that. So I'm gonna use that title at some point. But I was trying to work on this adult relationship, among other things, and the main character, calls her lover the porch of heaven, because through that relationship, a lot of other things become possible for her to feel and think. So it's kind of like a porch, like the person isn't heaven, but like the porch of heaven. And I do believe that. I mean that our personal relationships have a lot to do with our belief structure. But this title,
My next one's going to be The Patio of Hell.
we're gonna have all those. Okay, Rita, you're gonna do what Larry the Bigante in the 21st century. Janet, we're just, Jody, Rochelle. We're just doing the Dante of the 21st century. That's great. That is great. Oh
So-
God, we'll
so-
just do it in,
So Mary,
couplets or whatever the
this
Divine Comedy's
title.
written. This title, well, I shouldn't say it in public. But my daughter, it was going to be "This Is Why I've Come" or "This Is Why I Came." "This Is Why I've Come" is uttered. This book is Bible stories, bookended by Bernadette, my protagonist, who goes to church and is waiting to hear confession. She's made this little book for herself in which she's written Bible stories the way she wants them to be, and she has it in her purse. She's waiting for confession, and then she remembers these stories. That's the content of the book, and then the last chapter, she goes in and offers her confession. But anyway, so she says to the priest, "This is why I've come." She said, "I can't believe in God, but I don't feel that's really a sin, but I kind of like to, that's why I've come." And, so my daughter thought "This Is Why I Came" is a little cleaner, a little better. I liked it too. At first I was going to call it Canticles, because each story is kind of a canticle. Canticle is like a song. But I realized it was a generational thing. Like I'm in my 60s. Everyone in their 60s was fine with it. But my kids are in their 30s. They all thought, they didn't know what canticle was. They just thought of testicle. I mean, it was just, they just said no. So we nixed that one. But then I kind of wanted the book to bridge this gap where people my age are still, a lot of us were raised with some Bible. Like we were Protestant or Catholic or Mormon or something, or, Jewish or whatever, and we know a little bit about Bible. But that's not, people that are 20, that can't be assumed anymore, at least not in my circles. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of very much wanted to cross this generational divide, and so I did think about putting the actual Bible stories in the back, but then people would just look them up on Wikipedia. So a lot of people that don't know the Bible stories don't know the liberties I'm taking. Like Zacchaeus did not go back to the tree. I mean, we don't know anything. We don't know what he did. But I just made all that up. He didn't have a swimming pool and a camera. All these things I made up. So I didn't use canticle because it was a generational problem. But I think it's a very pretty word. But you can use that word, but you just can't use porch of heaven.
Are there any questions from the younger generation?
Okay.
Yes.
Hey,
Oh, yay!
So, being Catholic and also somebody who studied theology, how do you, maybe reconcile isn't the right word, but how do you view the theological implications that you're making in a book like that? Because fictionalizing around something sacred as the Bible is a big deal. So how does that resonate with you? My husband and I are both from the Midwest. We're both Reformed, and we both go to church out here. So I kind of wonder, how you said that you kind of had to leave theology behind, but at the same time you're writing about a biblical story. So how does that?
Yeah, I didn't leave theological concerns behind. I think they are the thrust of the book. They are theological concerns, But I left the way theology moves on the page, the way theology is constructed and so on. It's an academic discipline, and I'm not writing in the rules of that discipline. But it's one thing to make it public, and so I like to say, in terms of my method, that what I came up with is not. I mean, I've said this. I always say this, but it's true. It's not what I came up with doesn't matter. What I'm really advocating is a method, and the method is also an ancient method. It's called Lectio Divina, you know, and you can look it up on your phone, and it has a history going back to the Middle Ages, and it was codified as having 4 steps. And it was mostly practiced in monasteries where there were literate people that could read, and where there were texts, mostly the Bible. And so it would involve sort of, we would say basically, prayerful reading of a text. And that would mean imagining yourself in the text. And that would mean all that stuff. So I'm not really changing much that's in the text. What I'm doing is assuming the people, like say if we're reading about Noah, and we know that there was a flood, but he was preserved in the ark, and then the waters went down, and then the dove came, and then they went out and they sacrificed. Okay, we know that, but Noah didn't know that was going to happen, right? I mean, people in the stories did not know the endings.
Right.
We know the endings. So I tried to go into it like Mary, you know. She had some kind of visitation of some kind. She would say an angel, but actually if you look at the text, she doesn't call it an angel. So maybe it's an old man or an old woman, I don't know. Saying, asking, giving this idea of bearing a child without any sexual intercourse. That has never happened. That's nowhere in the Jewish scriptures. We have women that get pregnant in old age, but we don't have without a human father. So it's unprecedented in this tradition, right? But she didn't know really what would happen, and if Joseph didn't marry her, and if she in fact did get pregnant, because she didn't know, like as the Bible's giving it to us in the Gospels, in the Annunciation, she consents, right? We don't know how much time elapsed before she consents. And when she consented, she didn't have Joseph was not on board with that yet. We don't know. But if he hadn't agreed to marry her, she would have been stoned to death. This was not just a cool idea to think about. She's stoned to death. And if you want to look at what stoning is like, I mean, I thought it was over. I mentioned this before. But no, women and some men are still being stoned in the world now. It's not illegal in certain countries. I won't name them. You can go on YouTube and you can see stonings. They just black out the face of the woman or man. But you see people throwing the stones. And we had that murder of Farkunda, last March. So the stakes were high. So it isn't like, I mean, we look at Giotto's painting or Fra Angelico or something of the angel and Mary, and we go like, yeah, she made the right decision. I mean, come on. She had no precedent. And she was not married.
And doesn't the scholarship suggest she was only 13 or 14?
Well, that's all speculation, but women had children young. We know she probably had her period. We don't know that even for sure. But so I wrote it like she was 15 or something like that, young, So what I thought, this is another, I'm getting a little sidetracked, but if you just look at the Bible and think about things, she went, you probably know the story, she goes, we call it the visitation, she goes to see her cousin Elizabeth, who's older, who is now pregnant with John, who becomes John the Baptist, right? And she conceives in old age. But the weird thing is, Mary stays there 3 months, and then she comes back. She doesn't stay the next couple days for the birth of her nephew. Yeah, like why, right? So I thought, well, then she missed 3 periods. Or she missed 2 periods. So I thought maybe she went to Elizabeth to see, my nuts or what. She didn't know if she's crazy, right? And then, but you know how when you think you might be pregnant, like a very common sign is, you miss your first period. And then you miss your second period. Now we can go to the drugstore and get the little test, but, So I figured that's why she left. And then she approaches Joseph. I am pregnant. I'm not crazy. I am pregnant. But it's really weird that she would leave because she's really close with Elizabeth. So I just asked questions like that. I assume Mary was like you and me. Why not? She didn't know that she was going to be blah, 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 blah. She was just a young girl.
And also you tell the stories from points of view that we don't see in the Bible, like the whole Joseph thing is so fascinating to hear and experience that. Like I'm with this woman who is telling me that she's conceived, but not from me, but from on high.
Yeah.
And like, how does that feel as Mr. Husband?
Exactly. Oh, you had an angel visit you, and then you went to your cousin's house? We don't even have record that she told Joseph she was going. Joseph had a really difficult road, and everything in the Gospels, what I like, I named one of my kids after Joseph because what I like in the Gospels is Joseph figures everything out by having a dream and paying attention to it and obeying the dream. It's never he reads from scripture or he talks to his friends or anything. So he decides to marry Mary because he has a dream to that effect. And then he decides to take them all of a sudden out of the leave, and the baby is preserved and they come back after Herod has killed all the males 2 and under. That coming back is in a dream. So he's really like this dreamy person but dreams understood like we would understand them now in the 20th century. It's really you thinking while you're sleeping, unconscious stuff material that you're thinking that's really important, right? But we don't have any conversation of him getting advice from anybody or anything like that. And what Catholics have traditionally done is made him old because he disappears. There's nothing about that in the Bible. We have no reference of anybody's age. So I made him young, like 16. Why not, right? So what's really important about reading the Bible, I think, and even studying theology is you get a better sense of what is the core stuff and what's the made up stuff. All right. So Jesus, you say paintings of Joseph, he's really old, he's got a cane and all this stuff. That's totally made up. It's made up for a reason, just like I make up stuff for a reason. Who knows? Maybe he was old. I don't know. But it's not in Scripture. So I think it's, to me, the main thing about this work is, and in all the work we try to do when we're trying to create objects of meaning and we're trying to have conversations with each other about what does this all mean, is that we do it pure-hearted and not primarily from anger and not primarily to hurt others and we do it with humility, because we're all, like St. Paul says, we're seeing like in a mirror, darkly. We don't have clear, even with our guides, we have sacred texts and we have ethical traditions and we have all the dream of science, the dream of mathematics, the dream of politics. We have all these achievements as a human family. But, when we're trying to talk about things that it's just not helpful when people act like we know more than we actually know. And I don't think it's useful, and I don't think it's loving, and I don't think it's true for the most part. And when I look at the Bible, I see these characters who did not know. They're like us, I think. They did not know how the story would end. We don't know how our story is going to end, right? We don't know what the election's what's going to happen in November. We don't know a lot of things. We don't know a lot of things, and that's okay. It's always been like that,
On that perfect note, thank you so much, Mary.